Do we have our panelists? Yeah, great. Thank you. Uh, really excited to tell you about more research that we do. And again, it's more of that collaborative research that I've been talking about all this morning, right? That it's just really interesting with the hope that addresses some of the challenges that we have in our industry, right? So the panel we have today is all related to research we do under a program known as the Pulse Crop Health Initiative, okay? And I'll tell you a little bit more about that program in a bit. But before that, let me introduce the panelists we're gonna have today here. And again, this is kind of an open conversation, okay? So after a while, I'm gonna just shut up, let our panelists talk, and we're looking for questions also from the audience about all these things, okay? Why don't we start with, let's see, Ray. Do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure, happy to do that. Can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm a nutritionist, physiologist with the USDA located at the Robert Holly Center for Agriculture and Health in Ithaca, New York. And as Juan said, I've also been participating and been funded in these projects through the Pulse Crop Health Initiative. But in addition to that, one of my primary and probably the major objective is to do nutrition research on staple food crops. And we're going to be focusing even more so on pulse crops over the next 5 years. So that's what my research team does. We've been doing it here for almost 30 years now.
Thank you, Ray. Karen, Cichy?
Hi, I'm Karen Cichy. I am a dry bean geneticist with USDA-ARS, and I'm located in East Lansing, Michigan. And the goal of my research is to work on traits that improve the consumer acceptability of dry beans. So that really relates to convenience, nutrition, and taste.
Phil?
Hi there. I'm Phil McClean. I'm a faculty member with Juan in the Department of Plant Sciences at NDSU itself. My primary area of research is in genetics and genomics. I've worked with Juan quite a bit on a number of different genetic projects, both in the US and internationally. And right now, one of our focus, multiple focuses, but one of our focuses is on health benefits, basically trying to understand everything from the field down to the upstream basic research. What are those genetic factors which are important to maintaining the bean as a healthy food crop?
Thank you to the three of you. And one of the things that I honestly most like about my job is the people I get to work with. And I work with all these excellent scientists and research, and that makes my job really, really enjoyable. I learned so much by just working with all of them. It's been great. So a little bit about the Pulse Crop Health Initiative. This is, and again, Phil, Ray, or Karen, if I make a mistake on what I'm saying, just correct me, don't worry. But several years ago, a group known as the American Pulse Association, APA, was lobbying in the government, actually, to try to find or fund research that is related to how pulses, including not only beans, but also peas, lentils, chickpeas, how all those pulses or legumes, however you want to call it, contribute or help to have a more healthy population, right? And what we can do as plant scientists and geneticists to kind of continue improving that, right? They were successful with the request, and then the money was allocated to the USDA-ARS as a management entity. So here's the money you administer, and then what they do is they call for competitive grants, right? So anybody in a university or an institution can just pretty much submit a project, and it goes into an evaluation process, and that's pretty much what happens with many of the grant work that we have to do for many areas, not just for breeding and genetics, right? We were very lucky. So again, it's not just beans. If you go to the Pulse Crop Health Initiative website, you're going to find projects working on chickpeas, projects working on pea, et cetera, et cetera. Luckily, there are at least 2 projects that are specifically devoted to dry edible beans, and those are the ones that we want to discuss today because all these collaborators here are the ones that are in charge of those projects, okay? The first one of those is enhancing the nutritional and functional traits of dry bean through metabolomics, genetics, and breeding, right? And Phil is the program leader on that project. And then we have another one. The title is Developing the Next Generation of Flavonoid-Enhanced Dry Beans. And again, Phil, you're also the PI on that one, right? Yeah. So again, Phil has been great at getting a lot of grants for the bean work. I will say half of my research money that comes from grants and stuff are shared with Phil as well. So again, this is an open floor. I'm gonna kind of go quickly. Why don't we do this? Phil, why don't you talk about the metabolomics project briefly? And then Ray and Karen can probably talk about the other project, and no more than 4 minutes. And then we'll kind of, I have some questions here if we don't get any questions from the group, but yeah, let's try that. Why don't you start, Phil, talking about the metabolomics project quickly?
Before I do that, Juan, I'd like to share a little bit here about bean research itself. I'm gonna see if I can, I'm gonna share this right here. Everybody see this here? Beans are a public crop. Everybody see this? You see that, Juan?
It's pretty small, but if you can zoom in, maybe.
Okay.
This is a huge
I
room.
want to make a point that of all the field crops in the U.S., the total value is $200 billion a year, and corn and soybean amounts to 140 of that 200 billion, which is 70% of the total U.S. field crop value for just those 2 crops. And that's actually reflected in the R&D investment. Corteva, one of the big 3, annually spends $500 million in R&D on corn and soybean, which means that these crops are essentially private crops. All the R&D and the release are basically are controlled by these major companies. Conversely, dry beans is a $900 million crop, which is just 0.4%. In the North Harvest area, 420 million, this is all 2021 data, it's just 2% of the total, 0.2% of the total crop value. What does this mean? That means that beans are there's not much private investment in beans themselves. So beans are a public crop which is supported by land grants, USDA, and commodity groups like Pulse Harvest. If it wasn't for the PCHI, there would be very, very little bean health research which goes on. So as Juan said, the PCHI actually supports multiple crops, and the PCHI board needs to hear from the bean grower community to ensure that there's actual equitable funding through the PCHI for bean research itself. So back to the project, the very first one. The Metabolite project has 4 different objectives. The first one is to basically develop fingerprints, which basically tell us general types of metabolites which are actually found in a bean plant. And one of the results that we actually found out, there were actually significant differences among the different market classes itself. So that basically told us that not all beans have the same collection of metabolites. Secondly, Juan and I are sharing a student, and we're basically trying to understand the genetic factors which actually control those metabolites. The third is, and this is important if we want to talk about beans from a particular regional area, what we're starting to see is that when you perform field trials at different locations, and there are 5 locations tested, 3 in Washington, 2 in North Dakota, that between locations, the metabolite distribution differed in pinto beans, which means it wasn't stable from location to location, but it was stable for navies and blacks. So those are the main three different results that we actually have for the metabolite program. The fourth objective, and I'm going to let Karen talk about this, and this was to correlate specific fingerprints associated with good sensory characteristics.
Okay, so yeah, I would like to say, in regard to sensory characteristics, the slide that Chelsea presented this morning, where she showed what is the recommended level of beans that we should be eating in the US versus what we actually are eating, that's what we're really trying to address here with our sensory work, because we recognize that our US consumers are not eating beans at the level that is recommended. And so we're trying to find ways to make beans more appealing to consumers. And there's many different ways that we are working on this. But specifically for this project, we recognize that just eating whole beans, whether they're canned or you buy them dry and you cook them, is maybe it will raise the consumption a little bit, but there's a whole bunch of consumers out there who are never going to do that, or maybe only once in a while they are going to eat whole beans. So the sensory characteristic that we have really been looking at here is looking at beans as ingredients, looking at them, making them into flours and making them into pasta. Number one, that has been what we have done a lot of research on, and then making them into baked goods. Now, we've made much more progress on the pasta side of it because it just has a longer cooking process, and it's just easier. It's easier to get a product when you make beans into a flour. It's easier to get a pasta product. So what we've been trying to understand is which varieties, which breeding lines should we be using to make beans into flour? Because this really hasn't been done in the past. You know, nobody has traditionally, even around the world, beans have not been milled into a flour and used as an ingredient. They, you know, other pulses have. Chickpeas have a history of being used as a flour, but not beans. So we don't necessarily know what characteristics that we are looking for in beans that would make a good flour. What is it that we want to be selecting for? And some of the things that we have found so far, which are really good news for us overall from a nutritional perspective, is that beans that have higher levels of protein make better ingredients, they make better flour, and they make pasta that is firmer. And that's really good news, because one of the real challenges when you try to make pasta out of beans, or like a gluten-free pasta, is the firmness is really poor and it doesn't necessarily hold up. And so beans are a good source of protein. We have not, as breeders, selected for increased levels of protein just because there hasn't been any, like, although there could be a nutritional value, there's not really been an incentive. So now this could be an incentive to start paying more attention and getting higher levels of protein. I don't have as much to report on the how the flour will work as baked goods. Like I said, that's a little more challenging, but we're continuing to work in that area.
Thank you, Karen. Ray, you want to talk about the other project briefly, and then we'll get into some questions. Before you do that, I just remember that also Phil Miklas is a collaborator in this, but he's too shy to be here. I know he's hiding somewhere here, but yeah, he should be here up with me. Go ahead, Ray.
So basically, you know, it's great to follow Karen and Phil here in this part of the presentation, because what they're talking about are the agricultural, the breeding, the genetics that they work on. And my role as a physiologist and in the human nutrition program is to basically take the information and the expertise they have and fold that into, okay, how are we developing, identifying, creating food products with improved nutritional benefit. And that's one of the, I think, biggest opportunities we have at this interface of agriculture and nutrition is with the pulse crops. What my lab does is utilize tools that we've developed here at USDA to screen the food crops, to look at all the ways that nutritional, processing and agriculture and the ingredient combinations, all of that is what we're interested in, and putting that information out there and creating the body of evidence that can be used for growers and grower associations to promote their product, for nutritionists, dietitians, and other food scientists to utilize all this information and our expertise and ability to do this nutrition research. So I think that's kind of addressing what we wanted to with this 4 minutes from my end. Was there something else you were looking for there, Juan?
No, I think it was last year I was sharing with this group all our results on the slow darkenings, how they cook faster and how they have more iron biodigestibility, as you say. And that's all research that was done by Ray and his group in collaboration with us. So that was, for us, it was like a really, really interesting journey that we've been doing on this program.
And that was to give a footnote to that, that was a wonderful finding, because here is something where we're taking our tools, and if I hadn't stopped in your office that day on my way through North Dakota, we wouldn't have come across that. But here we're identifying the nutritional benefits of slow darkening pintos that are already out there in the food system. And that to me, I think that's a real benefit. That's the type of work we should be doing.
So at this point, does anybody has a question? Anybody wants to ask something to the panel? Yeah. Did you hear the question, or do you want me to repeat, Karen? This is a question for Karen. No, you didn't hear it, right?
Oh, I didn't hear it. No.
Okay, so someone from the audience is asking a question that I know you're gonna love. They want you to explain a little bit more about the pasta that you are talking about. Is that 100% bean flour, or it has semolina percent, et cetera, et cetera?
The pasta that we have been making in our lab, we've made 100% bean flour pasta in the past, and we don't really think it has potential on the market. It just doesn't taste as good as it could. So we've been going with a 90% bean pasta, and we've been making it gluten-free. So we are not adding any wheat flour to it. We're just adding cassava flour to make up the difference. And it is very delicious. We're kind of scaling up production to get samples out there for people to taste right now. And I do think there are opportunities, and we haven't done this, but you could definitely, lower that percentage and start adding wheat flour. That's just out of the scope of the research of our lab. But there are all types of different possibilities. Once you have that bean flour, what you want to mix it with. If you want to go 100%, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying we haven't had really good results with it.
Thank you. I knew you would like that question. Any others? Yes. Can we get a microphone for the people asking a question? That would be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. So this question is again for Karen. Talking about the pasta using the bean flour, I'm interested to know if you use already different variety of bean flour, and do you aware about the method of milling for the bean flour or no? Thank you.
Yeah, I should say, so this is a very collaborative project. Phil McClean is the PI on this project, as he already described. Juan Osorno and Phil Nicholas are the breeders who are providing the pinto bean varieties for us to screen their breeding lines. And then in regards to milling, we have collaborators in Michigan, and I have a a food scientist who works on my staff. I'm trained in plant breeding and genetics. And so we work very collaboratively. And so the milling aspect, we have actually worked with a milling inventor, I would say, in Michigan, and we get really good quality flour when we use that mill. Again, there's all different kinds of paths you can take to get the right milling quality, but we've worked with somebody who uses, they call it a compression decompression mill. And so that is one of the parts that you should know in our research is the flour that we're using to make the pasta is not yet commercially available. You could not just go to the store right now and buy this bean flour. But that's really what our goal is. We are really looking for somebody who wants to start producing this bean flour, and then we are looking for somebody who wants to start selling the beans. And then as for the varieties, this particular project was with pinto beans, but we've also looked at a lot of other bean market classes to see how they make flour and then pasta and other foods.
Thank you, Karen. I think I'm going to throw a question for the three of you. Well, you can take turns answering this, so I'll give you some time. But I think this is a question that many of you are probably thinking in this audience, so I'm going to just ask this on behalf of many people here. But let's say I'm a farmer here in the crowd at the Bean Day, right? How these two projects that we're working together make a difference for me on my farm? Whoever wants to go first.
Well, I think if there's products such that Karen's describing, hopefully the demand will go up. And hopefully that'll be something will be positive, for you as a producer itself. Whether these particular varieties come out and can actually get particular prices, which are more competitive and increased prices, that remains to be seen. But I think it's all about demand personally.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would echo that. I think it's clear from the nutrition end of this, you have to get that consumer demand that would push for that product, and then that would increase the prices. We see this in other markets internationally, in East Africa for certain market classes of beans that get the highest value, because consumers are aware of the benefits such as fast cooking or enhanced iron nutrition, and that can make a difference to the farmer.
Karen?
Yeah, I'm really happy that I get to work on the demand side and for the demand side of beans, because it's easy because we're not eating enough in the US. And a lot of it, maybe we can say consumers don't like beans, but also I just don't think a lot of it, we just didn't have the tradition or the culture, just of eating beans. So there's so much opportunity. And I think that's really exciting. If we could just, get people to try these different products, or even try whole beans or try dry beans, I think that's really where the opportunity is.
Thank you. And this is our second year for this project. So, in research, sometimes you have to give time for things to start happening. We're starting to see some of the first results of this research. So, I'll be more than happy to probably next year come back and tell you more about the findings, the actual findings of the stuff that we're finding, through all this collaboration and all these projects. I have to say that North Harvest was highly supportive of this initiative back in the days as well. So APA was the group that went and kind of lobbied for it, but North Harvest was backing up all these right from the beginning. So it's an important effort. And again, it's some of the federal tax dollars that come back to you in the form of research and outreach, right? And that's important as well. Any other questions from the audience? Yes. We're going to get the microphone for you, no worry. Yeah, thank you.
Where do you get cassava flour, and do you mill the pinto beans whole, or do you dehull them, or what's the process?
That's probably a question for Ray or for Karen. Number one, for those of you who don't know cassava it's a root crop, very common in the tropics, delicious. If you haven't tried, I highly recommend it. But yeah, it's also very, very common in tropical countries and things like that. So do you get the question, Karen, Ray?
Yep, I got it.
Okay.
We have been working with whole beans. So we mill the whole bean. So you get exactly the same nutrition, the same nutritional composition as if you were eating a whole bean. Milling it, changes things a little bit in terms of what's available when you eat it, but you're getting the whole bean. The cassava, we originally started working with what was called tapioca starch, which is still cassava, but it's just like the extracted starch from the tapioca. And we were just getting that commercially at like local markets in Michigan. But now we've expanded to cassava flour, which is the whole cassava that's been milled. So it's not just pure starch. And that we've been working collaboratively with a project with a group in Jamaica. And that is a good question going forward. Like, where will we continue to get the cassava? I'm not sure about that.
To follow up on that, as I think it's good that Karen's using the whole seed itself, is because the seed coats of beans are where you get flavonoids. And flavonoids are antioxidants, which can scavenge molecules, which can damage cells. So it's actually, a positive for your health. You're all aware of all the positive effects of common beans. So actually using that whole seed itself will definitely enhance it compared to a dehulled flour itself.
Any other questions from the group? Otherwise, I'll keep talking. I like to talk. So, how are we going on time, Mitch or Eric? Okay. Any other questions? Otherwise, let's see. I have more stuff here that I could probably keep asking. Federally funding research programs like, the Pulse Crop Health Initiative brings together broad research backgrounds and experience. How did the two proposals we submitted were selected for funding and how that brings the expertise together? Phil, maybe you can talk about this.
Yeah, there was a project called the Bean Cap about a decade ago, which all of us, most of us here were involved with. During the review process, one of the most positive statements they said is that beans are a self-organizing community. What that means is we get together and we collectively decide what are the objectives to actually work with. So there is a long, long history of bean researchers actually working together. So we talk to each other and we focus on our strengths. Not one individual is trying to do everything itself. So I think that's a real positive of this community. People actually get together and find ways of actually working on it. I've just started working with Ray like 2 years ago, and we're actually seeing some fabulous results. We're starting to understand the actual genetics of controlling things such as the flavonoids, these positive phytochemicals, which are actually in the seeds of these particular, all the different varieties that we're looking at. So it's really a history of us working together in a positive way. And there's another question on here: how can growers help? Unfortunately, we're starting to see at state universities dropping bean research. I think it's important that you as growers make sure that you contact your land grants, you contact your federal offices and USDA, and emphasize the importance of bean research and why it should be a focus. Remember, beans are a public crop. The major companies are not going to put a lot of money into these type of products. They're interested in yield. So these health type of benefits that we're trying to maintain need to be funded through, as I mentioned, commodity groups, state funding, and federal funds.
Thank you, Phil. Any comments, Ray, Karen?
Yeah, I like Phil's statement there that beans are a public crop, and that's kind of something I hadn't really thought of, and I guess I kind of learned here today. but you know what's important here is to recognize that agriculture is nutrition, and that's one of the things that we try and make keep hammering that point out to the public in the USDA and the nutrition program. And the nutrition research that's done in this country, the USDA is the primary group that does that work. So, you know, how did these two expertise comes together? As Phil mentioned, you know, there's the agricultural interests in, say, the seed coat flavonoids. Well, we have that as well here in nutrition, you know, because we want to know also the antioxidant capacities and that we're working on, as well as nutritional benefits and how those seed coat flavonoids can promote other nutrition, such as iron nutrition, or promote or inhibit it. And that's a key understanding that we're working on with these two groups. So, you know, what brings the expertise together is the fact that you have a government agency here tasked with addressing this interface of agriculture and nutrition.
And let's not forget just simple serendipity. As you were saying, Ray, I mean, I think you were driving your daughter to Montana State University, and you stopped by Fargo, and we started chatting, and here we are, right, a few years later. So that's also great, the human factor and the interactions. Karen, you want to add anything on that?
I think in regard to the comment on the support of farmers, I just really appreciate the recognition, especially what I've heard, you know, just listening in on the meeting today earlier, you know, the recognition that you are working with such a nutritious crop and you value it as a nutritious crop as much as we do. And you know, that's really great to me, like that we all recognize, like, you know, we're working with this really great crop. So I think that really helps with the PCHI and our funding and moving forward.
Any other questions from the audience? Are we sparking enough interest? Is this great? Do you want to see results next year about all these things that we're just talking about? Yes.
I could also mention, again, this whole public crop. NDSU just submitted an NSF engine grant for $15 million, and it's on ag tech, and ag tech, which actually focuses on public crops. And again, beans are a public crop, and you know, that's where the support is. So hopefully NSF will think kindly of what we proposed and bring in some additional funds. But that remains to be seen. It's going to be super, super highly competitive. Every state in the U.S. is going to be submitting one of these grants, so it's going to be extremely highly competitive. I was disappointed to see that the USDA sustainability projects, which turned out to be $3 billion. I went through all of the awards and I found one award summary which actually mentioned common bean. And guess which ones were supported the most? I guess I don't have to say, right?
The big ones, yeah. Well, how are we doing on time? I think we're getting there. Okay. We're going to close down now. Is there any quick question that anybody may have? We're good. Otherwise, again, I'll be around. If you want to get a hold of any of these great scientists, just let me know. I can put you in contact with them for additional research, additional ideas. The most important thing is to highlight the support that we get. We're the envy of many states when it comes down to stakeholder support for research and the things that we do. That's the feedback I get from many other places. So we're very fortunate to be working here in this environment, and we're very happy. That's one of the reasons why I'm still around, I guess. Yeah. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.